Hello everybody, this is a lecture of political thought and today we are going to talk about the political philosophy of utilitarianism, and in that we are going to cover the founder of utilitarianism, Jeremy Bentham. But before going into that and before going into the details of his ideology, we need to have a brief overview of what we have already learned till now in this course and how they are connected to each other and to the topic that we are going to deal with today. We started with the idea of what is state. We started with the question of what is state and how we are going to define it. And we set off by studying Machiavelli, who is considered as the first person to conceptualize the idea of state as we know today. And when we read Machiavelli, we read the historical context to his thought, the background to his thought, how Machiavelli was a product of Renaissance and how that historical process had a very major impact on the political thought, political ideology of Machiavelli. And from then we talked about the other political thinkers who had taken the cue from Machiavelli. So we talked about the Western political philosophers. We saw that how Machiavelli conceptualized the human nature as essentially vile, and because of that essentially vile nature, he gave certain proclamations regarding the functioning of a state, how a prince should run a state. We saw from Machiavelli, we saw that he gave us the idea of a modern state. The idea of state itself was conceptualized by Machiavelli, but the state that we know today took a long process to come into existence. So we saw step by step how each philosopher that we studied contributed something to the idea of state, to the formation of the idea of state as we know it today. So I'm not going to go over the entire philosophy of various philosophers, but I'm going to talk about their very specific contributions to this idea of state. For example, Machiavelli conceptualized state in the modern sense. After the Dark Ages, it was Machiavelli who gave the concept of a state, and in his work The Prince, he gave certain recommendations, he gave certain suggestions of how a proper prince should run a state. So it was Machiavelli who gave the idea of state. Following Machiavelli, we learned about Hobbes and how he conceptualized the idea of state. Hobbes gave us the idea of social contract in his formulation of state. It was absent in Machiavellian concept. It was introduced by Hobbes, the idea of social contract. What is the idea of social contract? In which the people who were forming a particular political society would come together and they would give up certain of their rights in order to live together, in order to gain security. So according to Hobbes, one major thing that needs to be defended by a state is the right to life, and that right to life is something for which people can come together and form a state. So this was Hobbes' idea of a state, and Hobbes then again was the first person to give us the idea of a social contract. Then we have Locke. Locke gave us the idea of liberty. He added the clause, for Hobbes it was the right to life. For Locke it was the right to life and right to liberty and right to property that needed to be protected by the state. So to Locke we are indebted for giving us the concept of liberalism. After Locke, we came to Rousseau, and Rousseau was something of a different lot from these earlier philosophers because he gave his philosophy was less individualistic and more communitarian, in which he talked about the idea of general will, formulation of state, and it was Rousseau who gave us the idea of popular sovereignty. And further ahead, we read Montesquieu, and we read Montesquieu gave us the idea of separation of power, division of power between executive, legislative, and judiciary in state, and how a state which has this distribution of power would be able to would be a better state, because there would be checks and balances through these sections, through these divisions. So these are the various philosophers or various political thinkers that we have already studied. One thing that I need to clarify here is, when we talk about sovereignty and popular sovereignty in that context, we need to look at Locke and Rousseau. Locke gives us the idea of a popular sovereignty, but that popular sovereignty is taken away from the people when a government comes into existence. The government came into existence through people exercising sovereignty, but once the government is in existence, that popular sovereignty or that sovereignty of people is in abeyance, is not in an active state, which is not the case with Rousseau. For Rousseau, sovereignty originates with people, so people are the sovereign, and when the government is in form or in action, then also the popular sovereignty is still in place. Also, it is Locke who gives us the idea of majoritarianism, because he talks about how majorities should prevail, which is not the case with Rousseau. So this is a brief overview of what we have already learned, of the thinkers that we have already talked about. And when we read these thinkers, we also talked about how they conceptualized state, and we saw these various elements that were contributed by these thinkers in the idea or in the development of the idea of modern state. But we also read how they conceptualized human nature, and how that conceptualization of human nature by these philosophers was reflected in their conceptualization of state. So for example, for Hobbes, like Machiavelli, he saw human beings as inherently vile, inherently selfish, inherently evil, and that is why his state is something that needs to protect life, because without a state, people, when they are together, they would not for their own ends, they would kill each other, they would end each other's life. So that's why that kind of state is needed, because of how Hobbes sees the ideology, or sees the human nature, how he conceptualizes human nature, and that is the that is there in all the philosophers' ideology. How they see human nature and their state is a result of their conceptualization of human nature. But we're not going to go into those details. I think this brief overview was more than enough. We just need to remember this chronology. Machiavelli gave us the idea of state, Hobbes gave us the idea of social contract, Locke gave us the idea of liberalism, Rousseau gave us the idea of popular sovereignty, and Montesquieu gave us the idea of division of power between three sections: legislative, executive, and judiciary. Now we're going to talk about the ideology of utilitarianism, and when we're going to talk about utilitarianism, we first need to understand that what did this philosophy do. This philosophy did one very major thing, that it brought two important elements of modern political thought together: individualism and modern sovereign state. And what were the basic ideals of modern state that were asserted upon by utilitarian thinkers and utilitarian thought? They were democratic representative government, universal adult suffrage, in which every adult individual has the right to vote, and annual parliament. The parliament is supposed to be changed or revised annually, and a secret ballot. So these were the 4 elements of utilitarian thought, or 4 contributions of utilitarian thought to the idea of modern state. Now, what was the philosophy, how do we see it, and who was Jeremy Bentham, and what was the historical background to this thought? We are going to look at that step by step. And when we read Jeremy Bentham, we need to understand that he is remembered for the reforms in the legislature and reforms in the system of judiciary that he advocated, and we are going to look at that briefly towards the end. Now, what is utilitarian philosophy? Utilitarian philosophy can be very easily summed in this one phrase: greatest happiness of greatest number. So the basic crux, or the basic key point of utilitarian thought is happiness of people. And it is on this particular idea of happiness that Jeremy Bentham hinges his entire philosophy, his entire thought. We'll just look at who Jeremy Bentham was. Jeremy Bentham lived in England between 1748 to 1832. He was the founder of utilitarianism, and his inspiration to the idea of happiness being the core or the crux of any successful, prosperous state came from his childhood experience, or from his childhood reading of Telemaque. It was a text that was given to him by his tutor, and in that story, it was advocated, or it was asserted that the happiest king or the happiest ruler is the one who makes others happy. So here is the key term. The importance of happiness is highlighted, is asserted, and he is the one who was trained as a lawyer, Jeremy Bentham, and despite being trained as a lawyer, he never practiced law, but he was more focused on studying law and advocating or suggesting reforms in the legislative system. He was more inclined towards practical realities of a state, like he was interested in public administration, he was interested in social policy, he was interested in economy and economics of a state. So this is what his focuses were. His focus was on Jeremy Bentham's. We also need to know that he was also a supporter of the French Revolution when it took place in 1789, and in 1809 he befriended James Mill, whose son James Stuart Mill is another very important thinker of utilitarianism, and J.S. Mill, the son of James Mill, was reformed the utilitarian thought in a very major way, and in that reform it made Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism into a more in a different context. It changed, and it added upon, developed the thought of utilitarianism, the political thought of utilitarianism. So in 1809, Jeremy Bentham befriended James Mill, and he by the influence of James Mill, turned more radical, and he made various publications. For example, in 1817 he published Plan of Parliamentary Reform. In 1819 he completed his proposal to the Radical Reform Bill, and in 1818 he questioned the church and questioned the church in his work Church of Englandism. So his more focus was on reform. His ideas were more focused on reforms and reforms in the legislature. What were his main writings? His major writings were a fragment on government, published in 1776, Introduction to Principles of Morals and Legislation, published in 1789, and the Constitutional Code, published in 1830. We need to understand also that he was very influenced by the economic aspect as well, and he formed a group with the classical economists and James Mill, which was known by the name philosophic radicals. And what was the aim of this group? It was aimed at transforming England into a modern, liberal, democratic, constitutional, secular and market state. So the idea of market state, the idea of proper capitalistic system to be put in place in England was there in the philosophical thought of Jeremy Bentham, because he was with these classical economists and James Mill. He was a part of this philosophic radicals group. Now, having looked at what Jeremy Bentham was, where did he come from, now let's just talk about what is the idea of utilitarianism and what do we understand by it, and what are the various nuances of this political philosophy or political thought. So the basic notion, the ground rule for utilitarianism is human beings as a rule sought happiness, and the pleasure alone, the idea of pleasure or anything that gives you pleasure alone is good, and anything that gives you pleasure which makes you happy is a right action. And the best action would be something that would produce greatest happiness for greatest numbers. Now they essentially Jeremy Bentham essentially argues that human beings seek their own welfare, seek their own well-being, seek their own happiness. Now this is something that we have already heard. We have already heard about humans being selfish from Machiavelli, and we have already heard humans are selfish from Hobbes. So these two philosophers have already argued that human beings are selfish. What changes with Jeremy Bentham and utilitarians is that they advocate that ideology. They do not look down upon that idea that human beings are self-centered, seeking their own happiness. They assert and they celebrate it in a manner. And what did Jeremy Bentham do? He developed a proper scientific formula kind of a thing. This we need to trace back to his influence, the influence on him of Enlightenment era, of the triumph of reason and science, and of the triumph of objective thought. And he's applied that scientific spirit to the idea of happiness, and he formulated and developed a pleasure pain theory on scientific principles, and that pleasure pain theory was to be applied according to him for welfare measures of administration, for administrative setup, for penal and legislative reforms. So this was his ideology, this was his idea of happiness, and it was not something subjective for Bentham. It was something very objective, which can be calculated by subtracting pains from the pleasure, by subtracting sadness from happiness. So it was a scientific vigor that was reflected in his ideology. Now what were the in one of his works he listed 14 kinds of pleasure, which included pleasure of sense, wealth, skill, power, benevolence, in that sense. And he also listed 12 pains. And the interesting part is, when he is talking about happiness, up till now it would seem that he is a supporter of hedonistic ideology, that he supports hedonism, in which every individual should seek their own happiness. But for him, the idea of community's happiness, happiness of the community, happiness of the larger people, larger numbers, is very important for the happiness, is very important and very closely linked to the idea of individual happiness. So according to Bentham's ideology, we know that he's talking about scientific methods of measuring happiness. Now, according to him, if one person's pain or sadness amounts greater than the combined happiness of the other people of the community, for example, this person or an X person's pain is larger than the happiness of the entire city, then that is an unsuccessful state, that is an unsuccessful society. It should ensure that, you know, the state or the government should ensure, according to Bentham, we will come to how he links government with the idea of happiness, but for him the most important thing is that not a single person's pain should be more than the happiness of the people combined. So everybody's pain counts. People should be, community's happiness matters, not only of one single individual's happiness, right? And then further ahead he gives us the concept of why and how people do certain things, why, and he gives motives of those human actions that are conducted. And what are the motives that are there? He identifies 4 motives of why people act, why humans act. So there are 4 reasons or 4 motives. The first motive that he identifies is a purely social motive, in which people act out of benevolence, people act out of the desire to do good for others, right? And these are very few people, and they sometimes pursue other people's happiness at cost of their own happiness. First kind of people, first kind of motive of people's actions, right? Then further ahead he talks about the second kind of motive, that is semi-social motive. In this motive, people do good to gain certain praise, to gain certain reputation, but they still pursue others' happiness, right? And by doing that, by promoting others' happiness, they are also promoting their own happiness by gaining reputation, by gaining praise, right? The third kind of motive is the asocial motive, in which majority of humankind fall, according to him, and which is a motive of self-interest, in which people act, they are benefiting themselves, doing their own thing and not harming others. So they're not doing good for others, but they're also not harming others, they are just doing good for their own selves. And the fourth kind of motive that he identifies is the dissocial motive, in which people act to harm others. Their own pleasure is derived from harming others, from inflicting pain on others. So these are 4 kinds of motives that he identifies of human action, of how human beings behave. And we know that he provided a scientific formula, so he gives a proper calculus of balancing pleasure and pain, and he says that one must give a because he's so motivated by scientific spirit, so he's going to do this in numbers. He argues that one must give a numerical value to the intensity, duration, certainty and remoteness of the pleasures and pains. So both the pleasure and the pain needs to be numbered, it needs to be quantified. So the quantity is important, the number is important. So he quantifies these feelings of pleasure and pain on the basis of this criteria. What criteria? Of intensity, duration, certainty and remoteness. And it when numerical values are provided to the ideas of pleasure and pain, then it becomes very easy to subtract pain from pleasure and do the thing which provides you less pain and more pleasure. So you can calculate every action that you do on the basis of amount of pain that you would have to go through to do it, and the amount of happiness that you might receive from that act. And if the happiness, the pleasure from that particular act is more than the pain from that particular act, then only you should go ahead with the action, otherwise it should not be undertaken. So this is the ideology of utilitarianism, in which people are, linking, quantifying the emotions of pleasure and pain. Now, how does Jeremy Bentham link this ideology of human nature? So till now we're talking about how humans behave, what is human nature. So he talks about human nature and how human beings behave, how they are motivated. He talks about all those things. But for our concern, we need to talk about how that is linked to a proper system of state, how that is linked to the government. And that Bentham says, he comes to that link by talking about how services men render to each other creates human happiness. If one person is serving the other, then that would generate happiness in both the people. So, and this is where governments and government come in, because government can ensure that these services are provided to each other by various human beings through a system of rights and obligations, rights and duties. What does he argue? That he argues that a political setup, a political society exists because a government is necessary, because a government which would compel individuals to provide services to each other is important to make people do those services, and through those services they would then be gaining happiness, and that is the most important thing to do, and that is the right thing to do, and that is how a right government functions. Right? Now, this is how he links his idea of utilitarian thought to the idea of political philosophy, to his political setup, political narrative in his head, where the idea of government is important for men. The government makes men render services to each other, and through those services happiness is generated, and that is the ultimate aim of a government, of a state. Right? So this is something that he does, but then again he provides a nuance here. He argues that government cannot be exercised without coercion, without force. There are certain things that would have to be forced on certain people. There are certain things or certain rights that would have to be given up when a government comes into existence, and these things of giving up certain rights, of for being forced to do something, this coercion is something that would generate unhappiness. But then how would a utilitarian justify the presence of government? They would justify the presence of government by arguing that the happiness produced by the rules and regulations put in place by the government is more than the unhappiness produced by the coercion made by the government. So the government is the necessary evil, in which the happiness produced because of it is more in a society as compared to the pain produced by the government. So this is how he gives a basic narrative of why governments should be in existence. Now, what should be the ends the government should aim at? He gives 4 very specific factors that the government should aim at: subsistence, abundance, security, and equality. Subsistence, obviously, where people have to survive, they have to be fed, be taken care of. There should be promotion of new kinds of technologies, so that it would make the life of the individual better. Further ahead, he talks about how religious thought, which promotes austerity, which avoids or looks down upon comforts and luxuries, should be avoided. Now, this is a direct reaction to the altruism of Christianity, to the Christian thought, which promotes frugality, which promotes, living in very less, and avoiding pleasure. So this is a direct reaction to that Christian philosophy. So this is one of the other things that the government should do, should fight those religious aspects which encourage men to despise comfort. And obviously security. Security is a continuing thread throughout, from Hobbes itself, right? That the government or the state is entitled, or is responsible for the security that it provides to people. That security can encompass many aspects: life, liberty, property. These kind of things were already there in political thought. What security Jeremy Bentham's government should provide its people? It should provide the security of property, of power, of reputation, and of social status. These are the various securities that are to be provided by a government that runs on utilitarian principles. Now, we have looked at the various aspects and how the utilitarian thought is linked to the idea of a utilitarian government, right, or a utilitarian state. We have already talked about how individualism is clubbed together with modern sovereign states concept in utilitarian thought. And one other thing that is very important, and one other very major contribution of utilitarians, or of Jeremy Bentham's thought here, is the emphasis that he gives on representative government. He says that incompetent people, bad people who are not inclined towards promoting happiness of larger number are in power, or when they are in power, they cause unhappiness and misrule at a large level, and they should be replaced by other people who want to do good governance, and who want to make happiness of the community at large, of the larger number of people in a particular state. And he was sure that a representative government would be a more just, a more a better government, which would provide larger happiness to larger numbers. And it would also be important, a representative government would also be accountable to people. A representative government would also be, according to his thought, changed annually, and that would also contribute to it being a good government, a representative government. I also talked about how we are going to talk about certain reforms that were put into place in his concept of state. We'll go through those reforms one by one. But before going into that, we also need to remember one thing when we're talking about the Bentham's concept of state. He did not support the idea of division of power, which was formulated by Montesquieu. Why did he do that? Because he thought, or he argued, then when a government is already a representative government, then that government is already accountable to people, and when that is the case, then it does not need any checks and balances. So this was his logic behind the idea of not dividing the powers between three distinct categories of legislative, executive, and judiciary. So this is the case. Now, what are the reforms that he suggested in a state, and how those reforms were supposed to make the state, the government that runs on utilitarian principles, a better state and a better government than the earlier concepts of state. He argued that the pursuit, or the basic end of a state is happiness, not liberty. So he argues that the happiness should be the prime motivator and the prime end that a state should aim at, that a state should achieve. State should fulfill the needs of the people, and I'll now briefly go through the various things that he recommended. He recommended that for the promotion of happiness, the state needed to establish poor laws for the poorer sections of the society, construct hospitals, create workhouses for the unemployed, levy taxes. And why should the government levy taxes? For redistribution, that is the redistribution of money, taking the money from the rich and giving it to the poor, or putting it in the efforts to benefit the poor. So a redistribution of the wealth, a redistribution of money was also another important factor in the state's contribution towards happiness of people. What else did he say? He argued that it should also safeguard national security and security of people, establish courts and police system, disseminate useful information to industry, regulate banks, establish government's monopoly on paper currency, institute universities, appoint public prosecutor, and support the select. So there's a list of things that is there. And now he also talks about the reforms on the judicial front, reforms in the judiciary that was needed. So these were all reforms on legislative and executive front. What are the judicial reforms that he is aiming at? He says that the lawyers' fees should be replaced by salaries from the government, so that the lawyers are not tempted or motivated by the monetary aspect, and they would then hasten the process of providing justice instead of continuing the process of litigation, which would fill their own pockets. And regarding punishment, he also had certain arguments. He said that the punishment should be in accordance to the crime committed. Punishment was to be great enough to outweigh the profit from the offense. That means if an offense give an X amount of happiness or profit to the offender, then the punishment should be X plus something. So X plus. So that kind of thing needs to be there. So because he is belongs to that frame of mind in which he quantifies everything, so that in his head it is very easy to calculate these things of the amount of profit gained from an offense and the amount of punishment levied on the offender for that particular offense. The greater the mischief, the greater the punishment. Punishment should never be greater than the least amount required to make it effective. Now this is something important. According to Bentham, if this is the amount of crime or offense committed, and obviously in his first argument he said that the punishment should be more than the profit. So if this is the crime and this is also the amount of profit or happiness gained from that particular offense, this should be the punishment, but the punishment should never be more than the least amount required to make it effective. So if only this amount of punishment is required for making it effective, then the punishment should not be higher. The punishment should always be in check. The punishment should never be higher than the amount that makes it effective. So this is another important reform on judicial front that he advocates. And if the offense is of habitual nature according to him, then the punishment should be not only for the crime immediately committed, but for the crimes that have been committed earlier as well, because a habitual offense is something that is a greater offense as compared to a one-time offense, one-time crime, that kind of thing. So these are the reforms that he advocated We know his legislative reforms. We've already talked about it, and on one thing that needs to be remembered and asserted again and again is that he wanted a representative government, and that was a very major reform that he wanted on legislative front, on the front of the government's functioning. He wanted power to be with the people, and the power with the people was constituted what? It constituted the power to select and dismiss their rulers, and to ensure the people should be selecting their rulers, and they should also have the right to remove them, and the interest of the rulers should be very closely linked to the interest of the people they are governing. So representative government was the only solution that he could see for the problems of the society that he was living in. Obviously, he talked about a representative government, a government where there were secret ballots, there were there was secret ballot, representative government. These were the important factors that were there, and one more, an annual parliament. So the parliament needs to be annually revised. One more thing that we need to just look at before concluding is that he also advocated universal adult suffrage, which we have already talked about in the very beginning. That was another major reform, and in that he wanted everybody who can read the voter names on the voter card or names on the voter list should be allowed to vote, and that included women, and that was a very major breakthrough in political thought of that time. And he advocated women's right to vote at that point of time, and that he did because he suggested that if women were denied the right, that would cause unhappiness to them, and that was something not acceptable to his idea of a good society and a good government and a good state. So this is Jeremy Bentham and utilitarianism. When we will talk about J.S. Mill, we'll talk about how he changed certain elements of Jeremy Bentham's thought and revised and reformed the idea of utilitarian thought. Thank you.